Welcome back to the Stampede Blue Colts cast. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, Matt Danley. Thank you guys for joining us yet again. As always, the Colts cast is sponsored by Ernest Realty Group and homeprosindy.com. If you guys want to looking to buy or sell your house in the Indianapolis area or any of the surrounding communities, make sure you guys are getting a hold of Mike Ernest at 317-285-9691, or you can find him online at homeprosindy.com. Minicamp has started, is in the books, at least the first weekend of it. Mainly Colts rookie camp, and tonight I can't talk yet, George. We're getting that. Tonight we got my man and everybody's best friend covering the Colts is George Bremer. George, what's up?
Not much, a little bit of a rookie mini camp out of the way. It just feels like we're that much closer to training camp and that much closer to the start of the season. So it's always kind of a good time of year, I think.
Absolutely. This is actually one of my favorite shows that I have with you every year. It seems like we get to see all these guys, and there's so many names of these tryout guys, that I just most people don't ever get to hear about or really get anything on them. So knowing that I know you've got a keen eye for everything that most people aren't watching, let's hear what your first impressions are of just the overall look at minicamp thus far.
Yeah, I think one of the first things, and it's more of kind of a general practice observation, not even necessarily having to do with the rookies. You can just kind of see the tempo of practice has kind of sped up a little bit over what we've seen the last few years. There's just a little more urgency when they go from drill to drill, a little more energy out there. A lot of things that the players have talked about when we've had them in the past few weeks, you can kind of see it out there on the field as the rookies go through it. I think that kind of kept everybody a little bit more engaged, I guess, on some levels. It just seemed like there wasn't – not that there was a lot of downtime before, but it didn't seem like there was quite as much standing around when you were changing over from one drill to the next. And I think it kind of fed off. It felt like everybody kind of fed off of that. The players sort of got into a rhythm because of it, and it just felt like things moved smoothly. They moved quickly, and everybody was getting something out of it.
Nice. So then that kind of brings me, is that more of that was what you've noticed out of rookie camp itself or just training camp in general?
Yeah, rookie camp. That's the only time that we've really gotten to see anything so far. When when they did the veteran camp, yeah, we had like 15 minutes. It was like regular season availability. So we really saw stretching and a little bit of special teams, and then it was off, inside and done for the day. So this is the first time we really get to see full practice, and it was really kind of fun to watch the new coaching staff work and see sort of the tempo that they want to practice at.
Now, who's kind of one of the – we haven't heard much from Sirianni. We haven't heard much from Eberflus or anything like that. What's kind of, have you gotten anything out of them as far as to just kind of gauge like maybe even a personality or anything like that?
Yeah, not much yet. Tuesday's actually going to be a big day in that regard because we get the coordinators and we get actually all the assistant coaches. Will be really kind of an interesting day. It always is when we get that day, but this year in particular because I think every single one of them is a new face.
Right.
And all of them except for I think maybe Alan Williams have never been here before. So it should be really fun, really interesting to sit down with them for the first time and see what their thoughts are. Now that they're about a month in with the veterans, I mean, they haven't done a whole lot of on-field work. They're going to be in the third week of phase 2 now, starting Monday. And then after that, they get into OTAs next week, and that's when things will really start to look like kind of football as we know it, I guess,
Right.
on some level. And I think that's what is really fun right now is that you're kind of going into that transition where practice is going to start being an open thing once a week, and you're going to start seeing the coaches have a chance to really start to install. There's maybe a little bit of it that got done in that first veteran mini camp, a little bit again this weekend with the rookies. But after we get through this final week of phase 2, things are really going to heat up next week. And I think it's fun to get the assistants now to kind of get a gauge for what they've seen so far and what they want to accomplish between now and when they break before training camp.
Yeah, that it's always fun to hear and especially with, like you said, a whole new group. I mean, from almost top to bottom in there, it's going to be really interesting to kind of hear what they've got to offer as far as, just their little things, man. Everybody, all of them have one, you end up seeing the interviews. There's always something about one of them that it makes them, I wouldn't necessarily use the word special, but just that different guy that you enjoy talking to the most out of the group. It's kind of fun how that works. I'm interested to see what you gain from that as well. But as you mentioned, you guys did get to see a little bit of the veteran mini camp. You guys have seen the rookies now. Going back kind of to the veteran mini camp real quick, it was kind of interesting that we got to hear what we did out of Chester Rogers, wasn't it? That said, that it wasn't in the transcript. So this was what kind of interested me, is that where was this and how was this actually said, as far as him saying, now this is, the way a real organization is supposed to be, kind of hinting at that. Although it's so hard when you hear somebody or see somebody tweet it or something to really gain perspective on how he said it. My assumption is just simply that it was saying something positive about the new group, as opposed to something negative about the old.
Yeah, it was a question. I can't remember how it was phrased, but it was basically a question about what have your early impressions been of this coaching staff and of the way things have gone for the first month or so you've been in the building. And he just kind of casually slipped it in there. It wasn't even at the beginning of the answer. It was somewhere in the middle where he just said, he came in and he noticed the speed that we were talking about, and he noticed the way that meetings are run, and he just kind of had an epiphany at some point when he's walking around the building and said, wow, this is what a real organization looks like. And he said it so matter of factly. It really wasn't trying to take a shot at anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It really was just him being honest in that moment and saying, look, things have changed so much from what he saw his first couple years to what he's seen so far now. And I think a lot of that has to do, honestly, with how long Frank Reich played in the league himself. I mean, that's one of the underrated parts of him as a head coach. He had 14 years, I want to say, in the league. He played under Marv Levy. He played very briefly under Bill Parcells. He's a guy who's been around. He's seen practice. He worked under Tony Dungy. He's been here in Indianapolis when things were running the way that everybody wants them to run here. So I think for him, he's got a pretty clear idea of what players need to get ready for the season, how things should be run. And I think that's what the players are responding to. I imagine this is a coach who's very familiar with what worked for him and is able to kind of translate that for them in a way that maybe not a whole lot of other head coaches anywhere in the league are able to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's always interesting to hear kind of the little bits and pieces from a new head coach as well, kind of like the rest of the group that you're going to hear a little bit of Tuesday. But he said something really interesting that I thought, and it just kind of goes back to everything that they've been talking about, all the moves that they've made as of recent. And it's really encouraging, I think, for Colts fans who are at least seeing what Chris Ballard has actually said he's going to do, he is continuing to do. And I mean, this isn't something new where people add to the roster at this time of year necessarily, but he is a guy who you obviously see each time he's making a move, it seems like somewhat at least of an upgrade. Even when Vanderlaan was nixed for Telfer, you see, possibly from at least what we hear from, the fans that know anything about him, that he was one of the guys that could be an ascending talent. He's built right. He's a solid run blocker, this, that, and the other. Well, he didn't I don't even know if he made it to Indianapolis, but
I'm not sure.
Before he really even anything started with that, less than 24 hours, I think, even until we had another roster move. We've had this kind of action and reaction, I guess, from Chris Ballard since he's been here. And that's something that, he said he's going to continue to plug away and improve this roster daily, 24 hours a day, 7 a week, 365 a year. It's not going to stop, and it doesn't. And I love that about him. And I think that other Colts fans are invigorated, despite the fact that they know that this team doesn't have any of the top level talent necessarily that's going to get them to reasonably a double-digit season, aside from, Luck, T.Y. Hilton, and maybe a handful of others like Costanzo or whoever that is going to really help. And obviously with last year's class, this year's rookie class, people are excited to see it, but they want to see the intent to make this roster better.
Yeah, and what you can see, especially on the defensive line, is trying to do it in waves, trying to bring in as many bodies as you can, not just to have competition in training camp and through this spring and all through the summer, but to have those fresh bodies to bring in on game day. Frank Reich has said it 3 or 4 times now they want to play 8 defensive linemen. They want to feel like they have 8 guys in that rotation they can put on the field at any time. And I don't think he's talking about just, situations like we've seen in the past where you want to have a guy ready in case somebody gets hurt. He's talking about doing what Philadelphia did and being able to run a guy out there on first down, run a different guy out there on second down, run a different guy out there on third down if you need to, wear down the offensive line. And you saw in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl what that meant. The fresh legs the Philadelphia defensive linemen had, and they go make a huge play and win that game. How much that had to do with the fact that they were fresher than the Patriots offensive line was at that point. It's probably a debate. You can talk about it, for years to come, but I think that's part of the plan here. And it's also part of what you were just talking about. There's not a lot of top shelf blue chip talent on this roster. So why not put guys that you have in the best positions that you can, put them in situations in the game where they can do their best and really use that team unit approach. And I think that's something they're all buying into right now. That's one thing that Frank Reich has been preaching from day one. And I think the players have really logged on to it. The idea that it's the Chris Ballard way. We've heard it literally from the day he was hired. It's not about one guy. It's not about one situation. It's about 53 guys playing together, getting the most out of all of them. And I think Reich is really trying to do that, not just in practice, not just in roster building, but in the game plan, in the way the scheme is. The offense is the same way. You look at the wide receivers, you look at the running backs, and you can go, why didn't they add more veteran talent to the wide receiver group? Why haven't they added more veterans to the running back group? And part of that is because they want to be able to say, we're going to put 4, 5, 6 guys out there over the course of a game. We expect you all to be able to have your moments, to be able to come in a certain situation that fits your skill set and make a play. And I think that's what you're going to see with this group. That's what it's about this year, is sort of an all-in philosophy, sort of a let's throw as many bodies as we can out there. Let's keep the other side guessing as much as we can and see if we can't, in smaller doses, put these guys in situations where they can have the best chance for success.
Yeah, he said that, what is it? He wanted 8 starters on defense, on the defensive line, and 10 on the offensive line?
10 on the offensive line.
Yeah, and I mean, that really, like you said, everything that you said about it, him getting that level group. And it's really interesting. I don't think that people really give the credit for this often. I think they notice it, but I hope that Colts fans are understanding what Bauer's doing. It's not, and he understands, and we have to understand that everybody else should be getting this too. It's not that he thinks that some of these guys that he's bringing in for depth are to be playmakers necessarily. Everybody hopes they can, but he understands that that's not necessarily their ceiling, right? He's bringing in guys to eliminate the bottom talent at each time, to bring the level of the bottom tier of the talent on the roster up. That helps everybody in every situation. When you've got a guy who comes in who's only slightly less good or whatever they're doing at that time, that it's better than having to worry about a guy who's bottom of the barrel at all. You bring that mean of talent up on the roster. And one of the things that Reich said, yesterday that really I thought was interesting is he gave kind of a Bill Parcells. He was paraphrasing when he said it, but that Parcells was his coach for a time, and that he made a statement saying that that Parcells said he was the most selfish coach that anybody will ever play for, because he's always going to put the best 11 players on the field. And I think that is something that it seems like that should have always been the case, right, George? I mean, that's it's just, this isn't groundbreaking, ability to build a roster or to play, and be the most competitive in each game. But that isn't something that we've always seen in the past several years. That's something that not only Reich is obviously about. It seems like everything that Bauer is teaching, Reich is right in, in lockstep with him. And it seems like those offensive and defensive and special teams coaches and the position coaches and all of them, it seems that it's running downhill and it's catching on, and it's sticking. People are getting it, and it's rubbing off on the players as well.
I think it's big too. And we've talked about this before. I've talked about it with you. We've talked about it in the media room. When Bill Polian and Tony Dungy were here, there was that one voice philosophy, and it seemed like if Polian was talking, if Dungy was talking, if the offense coordinator was talking, whoever it may be at the time, well, it was always Tom Moore, defense coordinator, whoever that may be at the time, is talking, the message was always the same. I think in the past couple of years, that wasn't the case. Sometimes Pagano was saying one thing, Grigson was saying another thing. And even last year, you would have kind of a different, not a major disconnect, but a little bit subtle differences between what Chris Ballard was saying, what Jim Irsay was saying, what Chuck Pagano was saying. This year, it feels like so far, and it's easier to do, obviously, this time of year before the bullets have started to fly and before things actually start to go wrong. It does feel like there's more of that one voice philosophy. When Reich says something or Ballard says something, it seems like it's chapters in the same book. And I think that's a big part of what's going on out there. But to go back a little bit to something you said about sort of the baseline talent, I think one of the best examples of this right now is Austin Howard, the guy they signed, the offensive lineman they signed a few weeks ago or a few days ago. I think a lot of people haven't looked at his stats and said, what's so amazing about this guy? That's not the point. He's made 82 starts in the NFL, including all 16 games last year for the Ravens. And what you've got now is a baseline NFL starter. Here's a guy who is, you always hear about wins above replacement player, right?
Right.
Here is your replacement player. Here's your baseline guy. And what that does is it tells Joe Haig and Denzel Good, you've got to raise your game. You get three guys, you want to throw Raven Clark into that mix, competing, who didn't have a lot of experience, who don't have that resume behind them. And now Ballard's saying to them, we're bringing in a guy who means at worst, we've got a baseline NFL starter at right tackle. You guys have got to go and beat him out, or he's got to raise his game to beat you out. That's kind of the point on the whole roster. I think you see it right there. It's a worst case scenario. If these three guys can't raise their level of play, then you've got a guy can start in this league who's done it before. Since he's there, they can watch him. They know where the bar is set. Maybe they raise their game. Now it's up to the players. And I think the players like that. They understand. It's a very simple concept to understand. Look, we're not handing a job to anybody. Here's the competition. That guy over there is the bar. That's who you have to beat. And I think it's sort of like you were saying before. It's a pretty obvious seeming thing, something that should have gone on all along. But I don't think it's always been the case around here, and I think it's something the players are really responding to very quickly with this regime.
It'll be fun too as time goes on, and we'll see the residual effects of this maintaining itself and that being true throughout. Not only saying it and having it happen through camp, but having it last a couple years is going to have a real effect on how the roster is built in the future and people staying, people wanting to come, so on and so forth. And I think that that's something important as well. That my chair just went down. Is something that we have to, hang on a minute, George.
Emergency.
Yeah, actually, I was fiddling with my chair, and actually, it went down, wouldn't let me get it back up. So I'm not quite that short. So I think that's fun to think about too. Is the future of all that. And George, we've still got to get to some of your thoughts on these rookies here. We're going to take a quick break, guys. And before we do, I want to remind you guys about Mike Ernest at Ernest Realty Group. Mike and his team of real estate professionals are experts in the greater Indianapolis real estate market, and they've helped people just like you achieve their real estate goals. When it comes to buying or selling your home, knowledge is power. You need a professional on your team that can help you navigate the home buying or home selling process, and you need someone that can negotiate the best deal for you. Mike Ernest is that guy. I've talked to you guys about him several times. He's a true pro, knocks it out of the park every time. He's received numerous industry awards and is now on the most selling of houses in the area or something like that. I should have written that part down, obviously, but I didn't. But they always a leader in the Indianapolis real estate market. So when you guys are buying or selling your home, make sure you guys look up Mike at Ernest Realty Group. Call Mike at 317-285-9691, or you can also catch him at homeprosindy.com. Take a quick 5-second break here, and then we'll be back with some more talk about the rookies with George Bremer. All right, George, here we are again, my man.
All set.
People say I say my man too much, and I don't, and I don't care. So let's hear about these rookies, man. Who's jumped off the field to you? Who has gotten your attention more than anybody? And I think that we know one of them anyhow. But let's hear about some of the guys that most people haven't been hearing about lately.
Yeah, you probably know a couple of them already. I think the one name that I keep hearing again and again, and it seems like, and there's somebody like this every year. You've been around enough, you've heard it, and you know what I'm talking about. There's somebody who it seems like every time we have any kind of availability with Chris Ballard, anytime we have any kind of availability with Frank Reich, this guy's name comes up every single time, and it's Nyheim Hines. It just seems like they find a way to work him into the conversation. He's a lot of fun to watch. I think when training camp starts, it's going to take about 30 seconds for him to become a fan favorite.
Yep.
He's when he gets the ball in the open field, he's always doing something. He's just a fun player to watch. He's very fast. And I think what's interesting for me, and I shouldn't have been this way because Chris Ballard told us, and it's sometimes I hear what I want to hear and not hear what's being said. But I was almost expecting JoJo Natson. When we walk out there,
Oh,
I thought this is going to be a very small, very very tiny guy. That's not the case at all. He's thick. He looks like a running back. He's not tall, but he's built correctly. He looks like he belongs out there. He's super fast. Obviously, he had that time as a receiver, so he's versatile. You can tell Frank Reich is very excited about the ways that they can use him in this offense, the varied places that they can line him up. And the other thing about him, in the little bit of time we've had with him on the phone after he got drafted, during his media availability this week during camp, he's a very mature kid. He seems like a guy who's wise beyond his years, and I think it's going to be fun to watch how he develops. But I think Naheem Hines, his name has come up again and again and again, and it's something to watch. And then I think the guy I'm most interested in, for a lot of reasons right now, is Kamoko Toure.
hmm.
Uh, he's a natural talent. He's very instinctive, which is surprising for a guy who hasn't played football very long at all. When we had that film session with Chris Ballard 2 days after the draft, I think it was, he was showing us stuff from the Senior Bowl practice where in the middle of the rush, at the entire time, Trey's got his eyes on the quarterback and he's staying level with the quarterback. He's adjusting where he's at, making sure he doesn't overrun the play. That's something that's really hard for veterans to do at times, and it's something he seems to do just on instinct, just naturally. It's just really fun to watch that. We've seen some of his get off, some of his first step already. You don't want to put too much into a rookie camp, for goodness sakes. I mean, more than half the guys that we saw this weekend aren't going to be there tomorrow, literally.
Right.
So you have to understand that. You have to understand they're not in pads, and the guys will flash now. I mean, I go back to a few years ago when Carter was here, and it seemed like every day he would make a huge play throughout the spring and the summer. And as soon as preseason games started, he disappeared. And he's
Right.
not the only one. He comes to mind as maybe the most recent example of that. So you don't want to overplay your hand here. But at the same time, it's exciting when you see a guy starting to do some of the things that they brought him in here to do this early on.
hmm
So it'll be interesting to see what he does moving forward. But I think Toure is another guy that you're going to have to be careful with how you use him. He's not a finished project by any stretch of the imagination right now. He's going to be a third down guy. He's going to be probably I think they call it DPR right now, designated pass rusher. That's
hmm
going to be his role. But I think he's going to be a guy that's going to have his moments. He's going to have his plays throughout this year. And if you can watch him grow, and also he's a guy that he mentioned several times how much he still has to learn and how excited he is to learn, especially from Robert Mathis. Now that Mathis is on the staff and he's here full time, it's a great resource. And when a kid is open to that, it's exciting to watch. So I think those two really kind of jump off the page at you because what they did on the field, even in shorts. And then the other two are kind of get off the bus guys. Quentin Nelson is everything you expect him to be. All business. He looks like a refrigerator out there. He's mean. He's nasty. He's the kind of offensive lineman they haven't had in a long time. I think he's going to set a tone for this entire offense, honestly, in terms of how he plays and how he holds himself. And Ballard mentioned that, talked about him being the standard for what guys need to live up to here. And the other guy's Braden Smith. He's really big. He looks like, if you just see him, he looks like a tackle to me, his body type.
Hmm.
But he's very athletic. He can move. And I think he's another guy that just his size, just seeing him in the huddle, he and Nelson look like they belong. It'll be interesting to see again when the veterans get here and the pads come on, how that holds up. But so far, I think those guys have really jumped off the page. The one thing that was kind of unfortunate, not unfortunate for him, it's great for him. Darius Leonard, we only had 2 days open. Today they practiced, but it was kind of closed. Um, Darius Leonard was not here Friday and Saturday because he was graduating over at South Carolina State. So he's a guy I'm really looking forward to seeing because the tape we saw of him, the game that Ballard showed us was the Clemson game in 2016. That's the year the Tigers won the national title. I think everyone would agree one of the most fastest, most athletic teams you're going to have in the country. And he looked like he belonged on the field with those guys. I think
Mhm.
it'll be really interesting to see what he can do, given what they're looking for in this defense, what he can do when he gets here and starts to work with the Colts.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were talking about the line, I started to think, and you know how Kelly has kind of comes off, I guess you could say, from a distance. You know, I mean, we're not on the field, we're not his teammates. So, I mean, what I'm saying is just kind of his persona, I guess you could say. Yeah, as you're looking at him and you're seeing his, just the way he interacts, he just kind of looks like, don't care, I'm here to hurt people. You know what I mean? Is that kind of what you're getting with Nelson?
Very similar. I think those two are of a similar background, and they're just even the way they talk to the media. It's a very similar experience. No nonsense. I'm here to do a job, and I'm going to get it done. And there isn't much that's going to stop me. And I think having them playing next to one another, feeding off of one another for hopefully the next decade or so should be really fun for Colts fans. Should be really fun for Andrew Luck.
Let me ask you this about Braden Smith too. I'm kind of under, everybody's got their own thoughts and opinions on what happens with what, and we see that Ballard did state, he felt that Smith was the last starting level lineman, interior lineman, I believe he said more specifically, on the list when they were on their list when they were drafting. I didn't take that so much as to say that Braden Smith is going to be starting on day one. I took that more as that he was a guy that he thinks can start very, very soon. I would say that. I've kind of gotten the opinion, and not from visuals, so I can't say that I've seen anything, obviously on the field, but just knowing where Muhort's at when he's healthy, and I wouldn't necessarily say his ceiling, but how good he was when he was, healthy, and where he's at. That to me seems like a really awesome camp situation to see those two guys trading reps. Muhort got brought back for a reason, and yes, it is a 1-year deal. Yes, it was cheap for the most part. So people are going to argue that it was just for depth. I don't think it was for depth. I think Muhort is very much a starting guard in this league, and I'm anxious to see that at camp. I really am, to see those two guys trading reps, to see what else they do, who else is in that mix, in that rotation. But I think any way you look at it, I think that you've really got a real impressive offensive line forming here. And I went through this the other night on the show, where I kind of went through each of the offensive lines grades via Football Outsiders from 2012 until now. And I mean, 2013 and 14 were weird because they were surprisingly good statistically, I guess, as far as like how they got the running backs to the line, what they did. But one of the things with this offensive line has been an issue for 6-7 years is their second level yards, which is the running backs picking up yards after 5 yards down the field. This seems like the perfect thing for this offensive line. They're molding themselves well together, and we've got a running back or two or even three now possibly that can really change that as far as I'm concerned. That 5 yards past the line of scrimmage and beyond, Mack and Hines are definitely game breakers when they get in the open field. What have we seen with Wilkins? Have you seen anything from him just steady as the game? I mean, or otherwise?
Yeah, I think he's been steady. He didn't really jump quite the way that Hines did, but he doesn't do it's not his game.
Right. Yeah.
I think he's another one of those guys that's going to be seen more when they start to have the pads on, because a lot of what Jordan Wilkins brings to the table is vision, the ability to see the play unfold and to get in the right spot at the right time. It's tough to really see when they're out there in shorts right now. It's not going to show up as much. A fast guy, boom, yeah, he's fast. An elusive guy, boom, he's elusive. A guy who sees the field well, that's going to take a little longer, I think, to show up. But it's something that's going to be critical. And it's something that they're lacking over the past few years. I can't remember the last time they had a runner who you could say that about and with a straight face.
Yeah.
Maybe Joe Adai. I mean, it's been a while since there
Donald
was a
Brown
guy that
sporadically.
yeah, that was consistently finding the right hole, getting the right spot. You keep hearing Matt Forte's name thrown around a lot with Jordan Wilkins. When Chris Ballard himself says it, and he was involved in drafting Matt Forte, carries a little bit of weight, I think.
For sure.
Um, but, to go back to what you're saying about Braden Smith, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think he's being handed a starting job by any stretch of imagination. If I had to sit down right now and handicap the race, I'd make him the favorite simply because of the investment that they put in him with that second round pick.
Mhm.
But that's a wide open spot. I think the whole right side is wide open right now. You got Smith, you got Jack Mewhort, who I can tell you Chris Ballard loves. And
Mm.
I think he's rooting for Jack Mewhort. He loves Jack Mewhort's mentality. He loves what Jack Mewhort stands for, the way he competes. And I think he wants to see Jack Mewhort succeed. I think Matt Slauson's going to be in that mix as well. What's interesting with him is he can also play center. So I think he's a guy that could end up as a backup at all three spots if need be, and be somebody you can plug in and, something happens in the middle of the game, God forbid. But as we've seen the last few years here, is almost inevitable. He's got to go out there and you'd feel good about what he's done in the league previously. And the right tackle is the same way with Austin Howard, with Joe Haig, with Denzel Good. I think the right guard level of play is higher, but I think there's just as much interest and intrigue in what's going to happen at right tackle. And I think that's what's going to make this camp so much fun. The defensive line is in the same boat. The linebacking core is wide open. We've
Mhm.
got an undrafted guy out there now in Sky Moore who was flashing at times on Saturday in coverage. Just his ability to get there and knock down a ball, which I can't remember. That hasn't happened since maybe Jarrell Freeman that you saw something like that going on with the inside linebackers with this team. All three linebacker spots are pretty wide open. I think it's going to be fun to watch as we get to May 22nd and OTAs open up. First of all, where's the starting point? Who's lining up where? I know it's not a depth chart, it's not official, but it'll be interesting to see who gets those first team reps to start with. And then as we go through training camp, just how that unfolds. Because I would think if I was one of these linemen, if I was one of these linebackers, this would be one of the most exciting things that you could do in your career, to come in and know that the starting job is truly up for grabs
Mhm.
and you got a chance to go out there and prove yourself every day. What more can you ask for?
Yeah, I think that was really cool. We were hearing today that, was it today? Maybe it was yesterday. I don't know. That Sky Moore was been placed at the Mike slot. I think that's really interesting, being that he's under 220 pounds. One part of me says that's really interesting, and I'm curious to see if that's really what they're looking for, or do they just want to give him a shot in the middle of the field where he succeeded in college, as far as where his coverage drops were. But do they want to see him in that ability, or show that ability, and maybe try to kind of plug him in as a possibility for maybe the strong side safety in certain packages? Just to kind of see how he looks in the box up the. I mean, I don't know, brain.
Mm-hmm.
Brain stuff. Just working and thinking about where they really. Just because he was at the mic slot, is that really what they were doing? Or are they testing to see what he looks like in the middle of the field?
I think that's going to be really interesting to see as they move forward here, because I think uh, he was playing the mic, and then Zaire Franklin was also playing the mic,
Hmm.
which is, for what it's worth, in training camp or in a mini camp, in a 1 3 day kind of situation here. I'm trying to go. My phone's dying. I'm trying to go and get a plug in here real quick for it. Uh, But, to look at a 3 day kind of situation like that for what it's worth, and understand that may not be the biggest indicator, but Zaire Franklin was the mic. And then they also used Sky Moore as the mic, and they were using Matthew Adams
Hmm.
as a Sam right now. So, is that his role? Is that where he's going to be moving forward? It'll be interesting to see, because I thought, you go back to some of the things that Chris Ballard has said recently, and some of the conversations and what they try to parse all those words. One of the things that struck me, it was around the time of the draft, is he said, look, in his mind, Sam and Mike are both inside linebackers.
Right.
So I don't know if he means completely interchangeable. I know they look at the Sam spot as kind of the hammer.
Mhm.
That's going to be, if there is a run defending linebacker, that's going to be that spot. So I feel like that's where Antonio Morrison is, in this defense. It's obviously where Adams is right now. And it'll be fun to see, because I also wonder, on the Will side of things, Darius Leonard right now feels like he would be the most likely candidate, the front runner, if you will, there. but who else is in that mix? Who else are they looking at as a potential will? Is that where Jeremiah George will fall? I think it's going to be interesting to see how those linebackers shake out, who they want to play where, and are they interchangeable? Can you take, because when you look at Sky Moore, I can't see him playing the Sam spot. That doesn't seem like
Right.
his role at all. So I think it's going to be really something to watch throughout the entire summer.
Yeah, and I hate that I almost forgot about Matthew Adams, but and it's so hard to find tape on him. But all you ever see is highlight film, and that's hard to really gauge much on. But what you can see is that dude loves to lay it down, and that's what's fun for people to think about. They're thinking about getting a guy in the open field and just lifting him off his toes. So I mean that's fun to think about with him as well. But I mean the linebacking core in general, and I was totally spitballing here just to add names, but think if that was to have a guy like Matthew Adams and his aggressiveness and what he brings, maybe Anthony Walker possibly at the mic. I know a lot of people have discussed that. And then you have the other rookie, in Leonard on the in the will slot. That's a really fun linebacking crew to think about because they're so young. And I think that it plays with our head and says, man, they're that young and they're starting. This is going to be exciting for the next few years. And it might be, but there are, just like you said earlier, there are those positions that are 100% up for grabs, who the best player is going to be on the field. And I think that when we get into a little more realistic camp with, like you said, the veterans and the rookies are intermingling, and we're seeing kind of what their base looks like just day one. Who do they have where, and what is their brain at least thinking for their front four and their front seven and their whatever else they're doing on the back end. I'm excited to see that. Just give me that one picture, and then we can talk about that for days.
No, absolutely. And we talk about all these linebackers. We haven't even mentioned Najee Good. He's the
Right.
one guy signed, and they brought into this mix. And I think he's a guy, who they see as allergies this time of year are awful. I think he's a guy that they see right now as a possible Mike as well. So,
Right.
So many guys who you could maybe line up with Walker. I've heard that he's lost weight. He's slimmed down a little bit. Maybe he's going to play a little bit more speed, be the guy closer to the guy you saw, I think, his junior year at Northwestern. It could be a whole different player. And I think that's the kind of thing they're looking at. There's a lot of reason, as I said earlier, to be motivated if you're one of these guys in one of these position groups, because so many of these jobs are truly up for grabs. And I think even whoever starts out at these spots, they're going to have to work their butt off to keep it.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to get back to touch on Kamoko Toure real fast before we get into some of the other guys. I think that what was in his freshman or sophomore year, they started to give him a little more because he was so raw coming in. And I think that was his coach was saying that what they did is basically look, you'll learn as you go, just go after the quarterback. And he gained a little more knowledge. He gained a little more speed and a little more success with what he was doing and the ability to be more of a technician. And now he's kind of starting that process over as he gets into the NFL with the Colts. And this is something that I think that people are really going to see in him. If there's a guy that we can say, look at what this coaching staff has developed or how they're developing players, and you see Kamoko Toure really surging, throughout even his rookie year, maybe into his second year, that's something that I think people are going to really be able to grasp onto and take with them as far as, look what they did with him. Now he's, this or that. I think that he is the perfect piece for this coaching staff to be able to kind of show off. But I think that it's the other way around. I think that this coaching staff, with it being young, with you seeing that they want teachers in there, so to speak, I think this is a perfect fit for both.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I thought the whole second round is sort of that way. Maybe not Smith so much. I don't think he's as much of a project. He's a guy that can possibly come in and start on day one, like we talked about. But the rest of them, Darius Leonard has a world of talent, but there's questions about obviously the level that he played at, the competition level for him. And I think you're going to see the coaching staff and how quickly they are able to bring him along Toure, as you're mentioning, and his raw ability and that comes along. You can see the growth in Taquan Lewis too. Here's a guy who has played the game longer than Toure has, but they're looking at him as somebody that might be able to move inside and out a little bit. He's going to be an end for now because they don't want to put too much on his table too early. They want to get him comfortable there. But eventually, he's the guy they want to see if he can move inside, play a little of that 3 technique spot. Again, coaches are going to have a lot to do with that. Their ability to bring him along, get that out of him. There's a lot of faith being put already in this coaching staff and in their teaching ability. And I think you're going to start to see that tested right away. So I think that's going to be fun to see. Like you said, something that's going to be not just this September or even this January, 2 years, 3 years down the road. You're going to still be seeing the fruit of what this labor produces. But I think Trey, to me, is the most interesting guy in this whole mix because, much like Hines, I think the coaching staff has a very clear vision for how they want to use him. And I think that's going to be interesting to see. With Hines, you're seeing Darren's role from time to time. He may return kicks. He's also carries. He's going to do a little bit of everything. He's almost on the opposite side of that.
You're breaking up a little bit.
I think Trey, am I?
Yeah, a little bit.
I didn't know. A little better now.
Yeah, it just comes and goes kind of in the middle of your thing. I think we got the gist of what you were saying, though. If you could repeat that last like maybe 10 to 15 seconds of what you were saying.
Yeah, I think the big thing with Toure is, they had that very clear vision, I think, for Hines and what he's going to do, kind of a little bit of everything, a jack of all trades along that offense. He's going to return some kicks. He's going to catch some balls, line up wide. He's going to get his carries in the backfield. I think Toure is almost the opposite side of that, in that they've got a very clear vision for him, and it's a very slim, very direct role. I think he's going to be a pass rusher, kind of what you were talking about at Rutgers. And they're going to, for this year, they're going to put him in and say, go get the quarterback and let everything else kind of come to him, as he can kind of take it. Mm-hmm. So to me, he's a really interesting guy to watch because of that, because, if you put him in a spot that kind of highlights his strength, will he flourish? How much fun will that be to watch?
Yeah, and I think what's fun, if you think about it, is I think that probably Taquan Lewis, who I think is a little more polished as far as a football player, I guess, overall, and to watch those guys come in late down situations or something, we're going to have like us a little version of the hit squad there. Mm-hmm. Somebody can be through the middle and somebody can be on the edge, and we're going to see a young group, I think, that's going to really intrigue us to watching them this season. I think no matter what their record is, no matter how things actually turn out for the Colts, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch these rookies in last year's class to kind of mesh together and see what we actually have for the future, something legitimate, something tangible that we can really kind of grasp and see, look, this is going to be fun. We have to be patient, though. We've had some success in this Colts organization. We've had some bad luck lately, but there's going to be a lot of fun. And it really seems that people have kind of forgotten that Andrew Luck is our quarterback. And I think that we have as well. You know what I mean? It's something that we're looking at all these other positions. We're looking at the rookies. We're looking at some of the changes, some of the guys who have been brought in, and we really aren't thinking about Andrew Luck right now because we're not seeing him with a helmet and shoulder pads and throwing a football and going through everything and installs. Once that all happens, we're going to be, I think that the Colts fan base is going to, honestly, I think it's going to explode.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's kind of interesting, at least in the building, the conversation has kind of changed. It feels like more as far as the coaches are talking, as far as when Chris Ballard's talking, it's less about will he be back and more now about what's he going to look like when he gets back. How are you going to get him up to speed, make sure that he's healthy, make sure that he's in, like everybody else, he's in the best position he can be in to have the most possible success he can have. And it's fun to kind of see the conversation change that way. I know the national conversation is still about when is he going to throw football and will he be back? But honestly, there doesn't seem to be much doubt of that at all inside the building. And I know there's people who are always going to scoff at that and say, what about last year? One thing, and people don't want to believe it, and it's fine. You can believe what you want to believe. One thing about last year is there was every expectation he would play. And I think that's where the disconnect is with a lot of people. When they were saying in the spring he's going to be ready, there was every expectation he would play. Something unexpected went wrong. When you hear him talk, it sounds like he pushed a little too hard. It
Mhm.
sounds like he tried to do a little more, put a little more on his plate, a little more quickly than he should have. And it led to them having to shut him down in October. And that was not the plan. I know there's a lot of theories out there, a lot of conspiracies that they knew all along he wasn't going to play. That's not the case. And when people say, well, what's different this year? The tone, the confidence that you hear from Chris Ballard. I can't remember a single time last year when Chris Ballard was talking about Andrew Luck where he didn't tap the brakes, where he didn't say, wait a minute, we're not putting a timeline on this thing. We don't know when he'll be back, and we have to be prepared to win with whoever's under center. He said those exact words probably 12 times before we got to September. We've got to win with whoever's out there. You don't hear that from him this year. He's talking about Andrew Luck and his progress and him being ready to go when training camp starts. And to me, that's the big day. When that first day of camp rolls around, he should be out there. He should be participating. He should be throwing the football. And if he is, the conversation is going to change quite a bit. And I think the excitement level is going to move up quite a bit too at the same time.
Absolutely. Let's get into some of these other rookies. Is there anybody that, maybe, I wouldn't say flash, but what can you give us about some of the other guys? Maybe, I mean, just to drop a couple names, Andre Tolliver, even Steve Ishmael, somebody like that. Has Kane and Fountain, what do they look like? Are they smooth? Just kind of any other observations from the rest of the group?
Yeah, Kane's an interesting guy because he's mad and he can't hide it very well right now. And it's kind of fun to see. He feels like he should have gone a lot higher in the draft. And I
Mhm.
think he's out to prove that. And those are kind of fun guys to bring in to your roster, see if he can go ahead and do that. And he's another guy that's in a position. You look at that wide receiver group, there's T.Y. Hilton, and we obviously know he's the number one guy, and he's got that job. And then after that, who's your two? Is it Ryan Grant, who they brought in as a free agent? Is it Chester Rogers? And then after that, you get into the 4 and 5 slot, completely wide open. You got a lot of young guys out there. Krishawn Hogan almost looked like a tight end this year. The few times we've seen him, he's bulked up quite a bit. He's a big dude.
He is a bit.
It's going to be interesting to see what he does, and he's
He's
going to
got
be
a
in this
ton of
mix.
speed too, man.
He does, and I think he's a guy that kind of gets forgotten. He got injured early on last year, shortly after he came onto the active roster. But there was a lot of talk when he got promoted last year about how exciting he looked in practice, how much they were looking forward to what he maybe could do in live action. He's going to have a shot with this team.
Mhm.
Dries Fountain, I think, is a little bit more raw than Kane is. I think it might take a little more time with Fountain, but it'll be interesting to see what he can do as well when we get to the veterans. And I think that was something the receivers were at a little bit of a disadvantage. I don't want to be too hard on the quarterbacks, but the
Oh, right,
quarterback play this weekend was not at a really high level.
right.
Philip Walker was out there, and he had a lot of the same struggles that you saw him have last year. Richard Lego looked a lot like he did at IU. Same kind of inconsistency, same kind of a lot of high throws, a lot of throws behind guys. So it's tough to really put a lot on the receivers right now. But it'd be interesting to see what they look like when they get out there with Jacoby Brissett, and then eventually with Andrew Luck. Um, as far as the other rookies go, um, it's so hard out there in that environment. Honestly, from having been there to really put a lot of weight into what's going on. But some guys do kind of catch your eye. Last year, Grover Stewart was one of those guys as early as the rookie camp. You could see that athleticism from him that was kind of unique for a big man. I think really what struck me, besides Naheem Hines, who was he's just every time he had the ball in his hands, he was doing something you had to watch. You
Right.
couldn't look away from him. It just seemed like he was commanding your attention, which is what you want to see. The other guy was really Sky Moore. It just seemed like he was around the ball all the time, and he can't hit. And it looked like that was bothering him. And he had that kind of itchy. I remember one in particular where a guy caught the ball in front of him. It was kind of a short pass, and he turned around, and Moore just kind of thudded him. He just kind of put his chest into him just to let him know, I'm here, and I would have taken your head off if I was allowed to. It was interesting to see. And I think guys like that are fun to watch because it makes you want to see what they do when the pads come on? Does that carry over? Is he still that same guy? The other thing, and again, it goes to more practice in the scheme. We've heard Frank Reich talk a lot about getting this ball out quickly. That was very evident. That was happening very, very quickly with this offense. They were doing some RPO stuff. They were riding the running back for a little while from time to time, but it was a pretty bang bang situation. They would get the snap, they would make the read, and the ball would come out really fast. And I think that's something that's going to be fun to watch and see how that develops with Brissett and with Luck when we get to that point in the offseason.
That's interesting. And that was one of the things that I would most ready to see, is to see kind of what those packages look like and what actually they're doing when they do get that ball out quickly. What situation, I just anxious to watch the 7s and 11s as much as we can possibly visualize that with everybody's back towards us. Hopefully that'll change this year. Maybe that'll be a different situation. We'll actually get to see something from our vantage point
We got a little bit blocked again from time to time this
already.
time around, but it doesn't seem like it was as bad or as often. But yeah, I mean the tempo of the offense is different. They ran more plays, it felt like, than what you see run in practice in years past. It felt like, I think both practices were between an hour and a half and an hour and 45 minutes, but it felt like they were chocked full. And I know because you were out there for training camp a lot last year. Sometimes it felt like they'd be out there for 2.5 hours, and when it was all done, said and done, you'd almost feel like, how much did they really get accomplished? How much really got done? Because there was a lot of, I don't want to say downtime, but it felt like there was a lot of downtime, a lot of filler in those practices at times.
Yeah.
It felt like these two practices, and we'll see, it'll change, I'm sure, as you go through the preseason. But it felt like these two practices were pretty stocked. Felt like they got a lot out of it. They got a lot of plays run, they got a lot of reps, and that's, to me, that's something as a player that I would want to see. I would want to get that kind of thing out of practice.
Yeah, that's interesting. What were any of the tryout guys? Did any of them look like they could possibly land a sign or get signed here in the next couple days?
I saw somebody today mention, I think it was Mike Serino, one of the defensive backs. I saw his name come up as somebody that the coaches were excited about. The other guy that I saw a little bit, it's interesting because of his size. They had a corner from California, Pennsylvania, I think.
Mhm.
His name is Vondell Bell, 6'3",
Wow.
6'3" corner. He was one of the tryout guys. He had an interception of Lego at one point. That kind of stood out in my mind. But it's always kind of interesting because usually when they sign one or two guys, which happens every year, one or two of those tryout guys get added to the roster. And I think I didn't see a lot of him. And you start to wonder, what was it? But you have to realize, too, we don't know what the coaches were looking for. And sometimes a guy that stood out to me wasn't actually doing his job. He was
Right.
standing out to an observer, but he wasn't playing the role he was being asked to play. And so I liken a lot to when you go to a spring training baseball game and you watch a pitcher and you wonder what's going on and you don't realize he may be working on a specific pitch. He's got a very strict agenda, and I think sometimes the rookies are in the same boat. They're being told specifically, we want to see this from you, and so without knowing what that menu for them was, it's hard to say. And then the coaches, they know what they were looking for and they know exactly what they wanted to see from these guys. So sometimes it's hard to predict who that one or two guys will be. But I know Sereno's name came up quite a bit in just conversation and in kind of buzz coming out of this weekend.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll have to check up on those guys because there was such a long list of them.
There was almost 40 of them.
Yeah, that's nuts. I mean, that's hard to keep track of. Like you said, I'm surprised that you even gave us any names. To be quite honest with you, George, I mean, not only is it hard to see what they're doing, but unless, like you say, unless somebody actually speaks about them, then it's really hard to kind of them for them to get your attention unless they just blowing up the practice and everybody's excited about them or whatever, unless there's something obvious that jumps out. But um, George, I'm interested to see what your favorite. And now I know that we've talked about the linebackers, we've talked about the offensive line a little bit, and even the wide receivers. Those are three really interesting situations and intriguing position battles that'll be coming up in training camp. Is there another one that strikes you as really hot and exciting this year?
Yeah, I think corner is going to be interesting in all honesty, just because You've got three guys who are sort of the front runners. I think Quincy Wilson and Pierre Desir look like they'll be the starters on the outside, although, as we've said, nothing's written in stone. Nothing's anywhere near being guaranteed to anybody. And then you've got Nate Harrison, who looks like he's going to return as that slot guy. I mean, after last year, there's no reason to doubt him. I
Right.
think that he's probably more a front runner for that role than Desir and Wilson even are in their spots. But then you got some guys like Kenny Moore, who was coming on at the end of the year, who Chris Ballard was really praising quite a bit when we had that film session and kind of informal talk with him. You could tell he's really excited about what Kenny Moore was able to do and how quickly he was able to improve last year as the season went on. And then Kenneth Acker, who's a guy that they brought in, who's been around the league a little bit. And I think one of those guys that you're talking about that when you look at his resume and you see him come in, it's not that exciting right away, kind of, oh, wow, this guy changes the roster, but he kind of raises the level, the bottom of that group. And so I think the competition among them is going to be really interesting. A lot of guys with something to prove in that cornerback group and a chance for them to kind of claim a role for their own. I think it's going to be fun to watch. Just the second year guys alone with Wilson and Moore and Hairston, that jump from year one to year two can be such an important time in these guys' careers. And now you're looking at them competing for starting roles, competing to be, really major contributors to this football team. It'll be a lot of fun to watch as training camp gets rolling.
Absolutely. And I think a guy like DJ White, who was
Mm-hmm.
brought in by Ballard from his past, and I don't know so much about Chris Milton. I think that I guess we'll just have to see what he brings this year, because one year it's solid, the next year it's okay and injury. You know what I mean? Just some
Mm-hmm.
inconsistency when he's been around, but he's been able to stick to the roster thus far. So we got to give him that credit. One of the guys that's young and a rookie in this year that really stands out as far as his build, I suppose, would be Robert Jackson. Now, I think just looking at his size and his profile, that's interesting to see kind of what turns out with him, if anything at all. But the guy who really got me by numbers and production in college in that cornerback group that was coming in was the rookie out of Arkansas, Andre Tolliver. So I'll be interested to see what he does once they get this group all mashed together and you kind of see who is, on that back end of, maybe what do you say, the
Mm-hmm.
top 3 or 4 corners there.
It's gonna be interesting too. Tolliver got banged up a little bit. There were a couple times. I think Wilkins did it too. There's a couple times it seemed like you had some cramps going on out there, which is natural. I mean, that's going to happen all the time. And I
Mhm.
think that's what it was with Tolliver. I remember he came up on a cart and they went inside to the building for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and he came back out and got back into the group. But he and Hines right now have the same number, which is always an interesting thing to see. I don't think that means anything this time of year because we see, and I think it's going to happen big time with this group. We see every year 9 to 11 guys when you get to cut down to 53 change numbers. And I
Uh-huh.
think this year it might be even more than that. I mean, there's guys wearing Deion Kane's number is going to have to change. He's wearing 8 right now. He can't wear that in the regular season. So we know there's one right there. But Hines is 42, which is a really weird number to see on him. It looks like a fullback out there at times with that number. He and Tolliver are both wearing that number. So you wonder, do you read into that? Probably not. It's probably not worth much more other than the fact that, they're both wearing that number. But that corner group is so stacked that it's the same way at defensive end, and I think that's the other position that I'm really interested to see. Defensive end, you got 2 vets and Simon and Sheard, who fit. Simon is I really just can't wait to see what they're doing with him
Right.
because I have no idea where he fits in this defense. And they say he's going to be a defensive end, so it'll be fun to see what he looks like out there lining up in that role. But with his effort, what you saw from him last year makes you more than willing to give him the shot and to see how it all plays out. Sheard seems like a great fit for this defense. I think this is probably a better role for him than the 3-4 was last year. But then behind them, you've got the rookies in Toure and Lewis. And you got some interesting guys like Denico Autry, the first free agent that they signed and brought in here. I think he's another guy that might bump inside from time to time, but he's in that group. And then Chris McCain, one of the guys they also signed recently. He
Yeah.
had a huge year last year for the
Hmm.
Chargers. This is a very interesting guy that they brought in May. And you wonder, is he a guy that could end up being a Mike Adams type of signing here? Somebody that came in very late in the game who ends up being a pretty good contributor. But there are so many bodies right now. There's just the sheer numbers there at defensive end that's going to be a really fun battle to watch and see how that shakes out as well.
Yeah, and McCain is super light for the position too. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't look. They've hammered into our heads speed, and that is something McCain brings for sure. You see him come off the edge. He doesn't look slight. He doesn't look like a small guy. And B, he's definitely 6'5". That's long. That is long for what he looks on tape, because he looks, I wouldn't say compact, but he definitely looks stout. And then when you see that he's actually 6'5" and 236, you would expect to see a slimmer guy. And maybe he does up close, but at least on film, he looks, pretty filled out. But I'll be really interested to see how long he sticks, because I think that he has one of those guys who has a real potential to stick for the long haul. But I wonder, when we start seeing these guys move in, you start getting, and I don't want to say attached, but you start really liking what you've seen out of certain guys, and then you kind of, they fizzle out, or they go away, or something like that. But I think that there are many positions on this Colts roster right now that are going to really have some interesting camp battles come up in this summer. And we've touched on a few of them already, and I agree with you on all of them. I can't wait to see kind of the pecking order in a couple of them as well. Not that I don't really know, aside, I think there's a little bit more of a camp battle at running back than people are giving it credit for,
Mm-hmm.
because of how much people love Nyheim Hines in the organization. But I also think that Marlon Mack understands where he's at right now. Shoulder surgery last year, he had some issues catching, pass blocking. He knows what he's got to do to be the guy. He's not a stupid guy. He's a smart guy. He's a good running back, and he's got a lot of potential, a ton of potential. So that's going to be one of the most fun positions for me to watch. And I don't really care how it turns out, to be quite honest with you, in that regard, because I think that either one of them on the field is going to be a plus for the Colts. And when you add in Wilkins and what he brings, totally different running back than either of those guys, or anybody, honestly, anybody that I've seen wearing a horseshoe in a long time. He is a super patient runner who really almost got under my skin, to be honest with you. Watching him on tapes is like, just hit the damn hole, go, and he never approaches it that way, unless it's wide, unless it's there, he'll hit it, and he's got some pretty good acceleration. But anytime where there's a kind of a slow developing hole, or the offensive line needs an extra second with a pull from the one side or the other, you see him very methodically, kind of moving with the line, and then he'll break once he sees daylight. He's really an interesting guy that I'm going to be wanting to watch too. So I think training camp is going to be it was one of the most exciting drafts for the Colts, I think, in a long time. And I think this is going to be one of the most exciting training camps in a long time. And I'm really glad that the Colts were able to get everything in order to have it where they're having it this year, as opposed to the facility, because I think that fans are really going to come out for this one. I think that it's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun, and it's going to be a great environment, I think, at a brand new place for so many guys, or for so many families and people and fans to come out and really kind of get a hold of what this team going to look like. And it may end up being, almost like a someplace that's sold out all the time once we actually see Andrew Luck throwing a football.
I'll tell you one thing: you're gonna have all the national media here once we see Andrew Luck throwing a football. There's gonna be TV trucks backed up out there for miles, probably. It's also a really high class kind of setting. I think it's going to be a really nice place to have training camp, and I think fans are going to really respond to that. Players probably as well. Interesting though, when we talk about the running back spot too, don't forget about Robert Turbin.
Right.
We think of him as that short yardage guy.
Yes.
But I wonder, when you look at Philadelphia and what they did, is he a guy that maybe can fit into the LeGarrette Blount role and the way that the Eagles used him? And I think that's important to remember. When you look at that Eagles lineup, look at what they did with their running backs. Corey Clement, they used him in certain situations. They want to do certain things with him. He had a big touchdown reception in the Super Bowl. He used LeGarrette Blount in other roles. You made a trade late in the year. You brought Jay Ajayi in. You let him use. I think you're going to see that from this offense. I think there's going to be 3 or 4 guys that contribute, and it's going to be kind of what that week's game plan asks for and what the situation asks for, and that'll be the running back that's on the field.
Yeah, they're just about every position that we look at. I think we could say or make a solid argument at least that the camp battle will be interesting to watch. So, George, any parting shots for you from what you saw, and even the older guys that have been in with their camp as opposed to the rookie camp? Anything over the past 2 weeks that's really kind of caught your ear that we haven't talked about already?
We did a little bit, but I think the biggest thing to me is just the excitement level. When we talk about what Chester Rogers said, he's the only one that's put it in those words. But it seems like every single vet that's come in, talked to us in the media room, there's a real energy. There's a real excitement. I hate to do this to them because the expectations that it leads to, but it's very reminiscent of the way we heard them talk back in 2012, where you could see these guys getting excited about what was coming in, what they were hearing in meeting rooms, and sort of what they're seeing from one another out there on the field. And it's kind of an exciting thing. I think, to me, the most amazing thing about all of this is when Andrew Luck came into the league. You go back to 2012, and he's the number 1 overall pick. And after his first rookie minicamp practice, the conversation changed around there because people got to see him. They saw how quickly he processed things. They saw what leader he was, and all of a sudden, they weren't talking about 6 or 7 year playoff windows. They were talking about what can we do this season, and I feel like there's a little bit of that going on right now. You heard that 3-year rebuild quite a lot from Jim Irsay back in January, back in February when he came to talk to us in the draft. And we understand that Irsay is a very excitable guy. He's going to say a lot of crazy things, but when he came to talk to us in the draft, all of a sudden he's talking about, hey, this can be a pretty formidable team right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right this moment, if Andrew Luck's healthy. And I think it's sort of what you were talking about earlier in the show. You tend to forget about him. And what's amazing to me is you remember what he was like, the pedigree, the best prospect since John Elway, all the things that were coming out. He's coming into this year, and believe it or not, that guy, the number 1 prospect since whatever year you want to throw out there, is an underdog. There are people doubting him. There are people who don't believe in him. I think that's an exciting role to see him in and see how he responds to.
Absolutely. I don't even remember where it was that I heard it, but somebody was talking about the Colts. It was probably a post draft grade type show or something of the sort. But then they didn't mention that Luck. They didn't really mention his health, but they did say, well, and they've got Andrew Luck as their quarterback. And I just felt like such a snide, crappy remark. And I kind of was like, what are they talking about? I mean, look, if you want to get on him, or not on him, but if you want to talk about the health thing, it's annoying and played out. And it's been forever that they've been talking about it. But at least it's a tangible point, at least to consider that, we haven't seen him throw a football, so we're going to wait until he does before we consider. But then to act like, he's not even well, he's an all right quarterback. He's okay. It's just like everybody has totally forgotten what kind of year he had in 2016 with that injury. I mean, look, people have to jump back into reality. This guy's coming back. Man, he's going to be coming back pissed. I think. I really do. As nerdy as he is and everything that people want to say about him and all that. But I mean, Andrew Luck is going to come back fired up, ready to play. And that might be one of the most exciting things that we have out of this is not only do we have a solid talent group coming in, there's a lot of expectations for the 2017 draft class to come in and really show this is why they were drafted, when they were drafted. But Andrew Luck coming back and leading the charge again, and I'm excited to see him make players out of some of these guys. Like we saw with Peyton Manning towards the center of his career, where they would bring guys in and be like, he's just a player. But Peyton Manning was hitting him, 2 and 3 times a game, and sometimes it looked like he was one of his favorite targets. They would say that, but it was just the way that things played out. I'm excited to see something like that from Andrew Luck this year, and I think that once that comes to be, and once he starts to just use any weapon that he has available to him, people are going to be like, watch out, this is going to be a dangerous team regardless of what he's got around him. If they can just protect him, which Chris Ballard clearly put an emphasis on right there this year, they're going to be dangerous regardless.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's 100% the case. And I think it's, it's so easy to forget. And I thought it was an interesting line when you mentioned that, because I think it's so easy to kind of forget what he looked like when he was healthy, forget what the expectations were for this team when he was healthy, and even when he wasn't healthy in 2016.
Right.
It's easy to kind of write this team off. And there are holes. We've talked about it. There, as much as there's competition at places like wide receiver and linebacker, there's a reason for that,
Mm-hmm.
because nobody has stepped forward. There isn't a lot of proven production in those spots, but there's also a lot of reason to kind of get excited and watch how this unfolds. It's a tough division. Everybody knows that. It's funny to say that about the AFC South, but Jacksonville's legit. That defense is the real deal, and they're going to try to run the ball and make the most of that offense to kind of make them get out of the way and let the defense do its thing. Houston with Deshaun Watson back is going to be a real problem for people. They're going to be a tough team to play. Tennessee has a lot to like, and coming off a year in which they won a playoff game. It's not going to be easy, but I think that you're going to see, with a healthy Andrew Luck, a Colts team that's competitive and that is in that mix, and it makes people remember that, hey, when he was healthy and when they had a halfway decent, even mediocre line in front of him, this was a pretty tough offense to stop. And I think you're going to see that again pretty quickly if he's able to get out on the field as expected and start to put to use these weapons in this system. There's a lot of reason, I think, for Colts fans to be excited.
Absolutely. Excellent stuff as always, George. We really appreciate you coming on the show and joining me tonight. It was a lot of fun, man. Always a blast to talk to you, and always love getting your instant reactions from things like this. It's always very informative. I know the listeners and the viewers like it, and I love it as well. It's always good, my friend. So thank you for joining us tonight, brother.
No problem. Anytime.
Absolutely. Guys, you guys can follow George on Twitter at GM Bremer. And thank you all for watching, listening, sharing the show. Love the comments, love the reviews. Keep those up, 5-star, and leave something. Whatever you like about the show, dislike, want to see do better, all this and that, whatever you want to put down. We appreciate it. And just want to thank you guys again for doing your part to help this bad boy grow, and it certainly is. So. Thank you, George, again for joining us, guys. Thank you all for watching and listening, and we'll talk to you guys all next time right here on the Colts Cast.